You never think it'll happen to you. You hear stories and rumors about someone who left suddenly and whispers in the break room, the kind of gossip you hope is exaggerated, but you never expect to be the one living it. My name is Jasmine Carter, and I used to believe that if you worked hard and kept your head down, you'd be safe. I was wrong. It started with compliments, the kind that made me uncomfortable, but were easy to brush off. My boss, Mr. Harlan, was charming and respected, the kind of man who always knew the right thing to say in a meeting. When I joined his team, I was excited. I thought he'd be a mentor. At first, he was. He gave me challenging projects, praised my work, and told me I had real potential. But then the compliments changed. He started commenting on my clothes, my hair, and the way I walked. "You look incredible in that dress, Jasmine," he'd say, lingering a little too long by my desk. I tried to laugh it off, to keep things professional, but he didn't stop. He started finding reasons to touch me, a hand on my lower back as we walked out of meetings, his fingers brushing my arm, and a squeeze on my shoulder that lingered just a second too long. One night, after a late meeting, he cornered me in the copy room. The office was nearly empty. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my cheek, and said, "You know, you're the most beautiful woman in this company." Before I could react, he reached out and ran his hand down my side, his fingers pressing into my hip. I froze, my heart pounding. He tried to pull me closer, his other hand sliding down my arm, and whispered, "We could have a lot of fun together, you and I." I jerked away, my voice shaking. "Please don't touch me." He just smiled, like it was a game. "Relax, Jasmine. I'm just being friendly. You know how much I value you." I left the office that night feeling sick, replaying every moment in my head. Was it my fault? Did I do something to encourage him? I tried to convince myself it was a misunderstanding, but the next day he acted like nothing had happened, except now he was colder. He started criticizing my work in front of others, giving me impossible deadlines, and leaving me out of important meetings. When I tried to ask what was wrong, he'd just smirk and say, "You know what you did." I confided in Mia, my closest friend at work. She listened, her face growing more serious with every detail. "You're not crazy, Jasmine. I've heard stories about him before. You need to document everything. Every message, every meeting, every time he touches you. If you go to HR, you'll need proof." So I started keeping a record. I saved every text, every email, and every calendar invite. I wrote down every inappropriate comment, every time he brushed his hand against my leg under the table, and every time he tried to accidentally bump into me in the hallway. I even started recording our conversations on my phone, just in case. It felt sneaky, but I knew I had to protect myself. Things got worse. He started spreading rumors about me, saying I was difficult, that I couldn't handle the pressure, and that I was unstable. Colleagues who used to be friendly started avoiding me. I was left off group emails, excluded from team lunches, and given the worst assignments. I felt isolated, humiliated, and completely alone. I tried to talk to HR, but the first meeting was a disaster. The HR rep listened politely, took a few notes, and said they'd look into it. Nothing happened. If anything, things got worse. Mr. Harlan started making veiled threats, reminding me how much influence he had and how hard it would be to find another job if I couldn't handle the culture here. I went home that night and cried. I thought about quitting, about just walking away and starting over somewhere else. But then I remembered all the women who'd left before me, all the stories I'd heard but never believed. I realized that if I left, he'd just do it again to someone else, maybe someone even less prepared than I was. That was the night I decided I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight. I started reaching out to former employees, women who'd left suddenly or quietly. I found 3 who were willing to talk. Their stories were almost identical to mine. Praise, then pressure, then punishment. One of them had even tried to go to HR, but nothing had changed. I gathered their statements, added them to my growing file, and started building a case. I reached out to Mia and a few other trusted colleagues, asking if they'd noticed anything strange. Some were afraid to get involved, but a few quietly admitted they'd seen the way he treated me and others when he thought no one was watching. I knew I needed more. I started looking for patterns in his behavior: emails sent late at night, calendar invites for one-on-one meetings, and sudden changes in performance reviews. I built a timeline, cross-referenced it with my own records, and started to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about me. This was a pattern of abuse, a system that protected him and silenced his victims. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. I realized that the only way to stop him was to make it impossible for the company to ignore what he'd done. I needed to go higher than HR. I needed to go to the board. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to make sure no one else ever had to go through it again. I started by reaching out to the 3 former employees who'd agreed to talk. We met after work at a quiet cafe, each of us looking over our shoulders, still wary of the company's long reach. As we shared our stories, the pattern became undeniable. Mr. Harlan's charm, his mentorship, and the way he'd slowly crossed boundaries until you felt trapped. Each of us had tried to push back, and each of us had paid the price. Bad reviews, rumors, and being pushed out. One woman, Rachel, told me about the night he'd cornered her in the office kitchen. He cornered her, invading her space, and whispered threats about her future. Another, Priya, described how he leaned in far too close, then brushed it off as a joke when she pushed away. Emily had been so rattled by his constant touching and late-night texts that she'd quit without another job lined up. Listening to them, I felt my anger harden into resolve. This wasn't just about me. This was about stopping a predator. I asked each of them to write a statement, as detailed as they could remember, and to include any emails, texts, or calendar invites that backed up their stories. They agreed, and by the end of the week, I had a thick folder of evidence, dates, times, screenshots, and a timeline that showed a clear, disturbing pattern. Meanwhile, at work, Mr. Harlan seemed to sense that something was shifting. He started watching me more closely, his smiles tighter, his comments sharper. He'd find reasons to call me into his office, closing the door behind me and standing too close, his hand brushing my back as he leaned over my shoulder to check my work. I kept my phone recording in my pocket, my hands steady, even as my heart raced. He tried to isolate me further, telling the team I was struggling with stress and needed to be left alone to focus. He reassigned my projects, cut me out of meetings, and started sending me cryptic emails late at night. "You know you can trust me, Jasmine. I'd hate to see you make a mistake you can't take back." I saved every message, every calendar change, every time he tried to gaslight me into doubting my own reality. Mia was my lifeline. She helped me organize the evidence, kept me sane when I started to question myself, and quietly spread the word to a few trusted colleagues. Soon, I had more allies, people who'd seen things, heard things, or just believed me because they'd always suspected something was off. One even forwarded me an email chain where Mr. Harlan had joked about breaking in the new girl to another manager. My hands shook as I read it, but I felt a surge of hope. This was the kind of proof HR and the board couldn't ignore. I spent my nights building a case, cross-referencing every incident, every witness, and every piece of digital evidence. I wrote a detailed report, attaching every file, every statement, and every recording. I knew it was risky. If Mr. Harlan found out, he'd do everything in his power to destroy me. But I also knew I couldn't back down now. When I was ready, I requested a formal meeting with HR, copying the head of HR, the company's legal counsel, and most importantly, a board member known for her zero-tolerance stance on harassment. In my email, I made it clear
This was not just a personal complaint. This was a systemic issue, and I had the evidence to prove it. The response was immediate. HR scheduled a meeting for the next morning, and this time the tone was different. The head of HR, Ms. Patel, greeted me with a firm handshake and a serious expression. The company lawyer and the board member joined us, their faces grave as I laid out my case. One by one, I dropped the files on the table. Emails, screenshots, recordings. With each piece, Mr. Harlan's mask shattered. The emails, the texts, and the recordings. I described the retaliation, the rumors, and the isolation. I showed them the timeline, the pattern, and the way Mr. Harlan had used his power to prey on women and silence anyone who pushed back. When I finished, the room was silent. Ms. Patel looked at me and said, "Thank you for your courage, Jasmine. We will be launching a formal investigation immediately. You will not be required to report to Mr. Harlan, and we will keep you updated on every step." I left the meeting feeling a mix of relief and terror. I knew Mr. Harlan would find out soon, and I braced myself for whatever came next. But for the first time in months, I felt hope. I wasn't alone. I had allies, I had proof, and I had the truth on my side.
The next few days were a blur of tension and anticipation. I kept my head down at work, but I could feel the shift in the air. Whispers followed me in the hallway. Some colleagues avoided my gaze, while others gave me small, encouraging nods. Mia kept close, her presence a constant reminder that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Mr. Harlan, on the other hand, was unraveling. He stormed through the office, snapping at people for minor mistakes, slamming doors and sending out curt, defensive emails. He called an emergency team meeting, trying to reassert his authority, but his voice was tight and his eyes darted around the room. "We're a family here," he said, forcing a smile. "We support each other. We don't spread rumors or undermine our team." The irony was almost too much to bear. That afternoon, HR began their investigation in earnest. Employees were called in one by one for confidential interviews. I watched as Rachel, Priya, and Emily arrived at the building, their faces set with determination. Mia was called in too, as were several other colleagues who had witnessed Mr. Harlan's behavior. The office buzzed with speculation, but no one dared to ask me directly what was happening. I was called in for a follow-up meeting with Ms. Patel and the board member. They asked for more details, clarifications, and context. I answered every question, my voice steady even as my hands trembled under the table. I could see the seriousness in their eyes. They weren't brushing this aside. They were listening. Meanwhile, Mr. Harlan tried to rally his allies. He sent out a flurry of emails, trying to paint himself as the victim of a witch hunt. He cornered Mia in the break room, demanding to know what she'd told HR. She stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about," she told him, her voice calm and clear. The investigation moved quickly. HR uncovered more evidence. Old complaints that had been quietly closed, emails that hinted at a pattern of inappropriate behavior, and even a few anonymous tips from employees who had been too afraid to speak up before. The case against Mr. Harlan was growing stronger by the day. One morning, I arrived at work to find his office door closed, the blinds drawn. By noon, word spread that he'd been suspended, pending the outcome of the investigation. The office was electric with nervous energy. Some people looked relieved, others anxious, and a few openly angry. But for the first time, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lift. That afternoon, Miss Patel called me into her office. She thanked me again for my courage and told me that the board would be meeting the next day to review the findings. "You've done everything right, Jasmine. No matter what happens, you've made a difference here." I left her office and walked outside, letting the cool air fill my lungs. I thought about everything I'd been through, the fear, the humiliation, and the nights I'd spent doubting myself. I thought about the women who had come before me and the ones who would come after. I realized that, win or lose, I had already changed something fundamental. I had refused to be silent. That night, I called my mom. I told her everything, from the first unwanted touch to the moment I decided to fight back. She listened quietly, then said, "I'm proud of you, Jasmine. You stood up for yourself and for everyone who couldn't." The next morning, the board held a closed-door meeting. The entire company waited for news, the tension palpable. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting to what might happen next. Would they believe me? Would they finally hold Mr. Harlan accountable? Or would they find a way to sweep it all under the rug? Late that afternoon, an email went out to the entire company. All staff are required to attend a mandatory meeting at 4 p.m. My heart pounded as I made my way to the conference room, Mia by my side. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. The CEO stood at the front, flanked by Miss Patel and the board member. Her voice was steady as she addressed the company. After weeks of investigation, the verdict was final. He had crossed the line, and his power was gone. Effective immediately, he was fired. A wave of relief swept through the room. Some people clapped, others just sat in stunned silence. I felt tears prick my eyes, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been hurt, silenced, or made to feel small. The CEO continued, "We are committed to building a workplace where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. We encourage anyone who has experienced or witnessed inappropriate behavior to come forward. We will listen. We will act." As the meeting ended, people came up to me, some to thank me, others to share their own stories. I realized that my fight had given others permission to speak up, to believe that change was possible. That night, I went home and looked at myself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, I saw strength, not fear. I saw a survivor, not a victim. And I knew that whatever came next, I was ready. The days after Mr. Harlan's firing felt like stepping into a new world. The office was quieter, but it was a different kind of quiet, one filled with relief, not fear. People started to look each other in the eye again. Conversations in the break room were lighter, and the tension that had once hung over every meeting was gone. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But the aftermath wasn't just about relief. It was about rebuilding. HR and the board moved quickly to implement new policies. They launched a confidential reporting system, scheduled mandatory training on harassment and workplace respect, and set up regular check-ins with every team. I was asked to join a new committee focused on employee well-being and culture. It was a chance to turn my pain into purpose, and I took it. I worked closely with Mia and the other women who had come forward. We shared our stories at staff meetings. Not the graphic details, but the truth about what it felt like to be isolated, doubted, and finally believed. The company brought in outside experts to lead workshops, and for the first time, people started to talk openly about boundaries, respect, and what real support looked like. Some people struggled with the changes. A few managers grumbled about overreacting or walking on eggshells. But the CEO and the board were clear. This was non-negotiable. "We're not just fixing a problem," the CEO said at a town hall. "We're building a new standard." I found myself becoming a mentor, especially to younger women and new hires. They came to me with their worries, their ambitions, and sometimes their own stories of uncomfortable encounters. I listened, offered advice, and made sure they knew they weren't alone. I encouraged them to document everything,
to trust their instincts, and to speak up if something felt wrong. One afternoon, Emily, the former employee who'd quit after Mr. Harlan's harassment, came back to visit. She'd heard about the changes and wanted to see for herself. We sat in the cafe across the street, catching up on life and work. She said, "I wish I'd had the courage to do what you did," she said quietly, "but I'm glad you did it. You made it better for everyone." Her words stayed with me. I realized that the real victory wasn't just getting rid of Mr. Harlan or even getting my reputation back. It was building something better in the aftermath. It was knowing that I'd helped create a place where people felt safe enough to stay, to grow, and to speak up. It was about making sure no one else had to choose between their dignity and their job. The company's reputation began to change too. We started attracting new talent, people who wanted to work somewhere that valued integrity and respect. Clients who had once been wary of our old boys club culture now praised our transparency and commitment to doing the right thing. For the first time, I felt proud to say where I worked. But I never forgot how quickly things could change. I kept my documentation habits, encouraged others to do the same, and made sure the new systems were regularly reviewed and improved. I knew that culture wasn't something you fixed once and forgot. It was something you built every day, with every decision and every conversation. Outside of work, I found myself healing. The anxiety and nightmares that had haunted me began to fade. I started sleeping better, eating better, and even picked up painting again, a hobby I had abandoned during the worst of the drama. I reconnected with friends, traveled, and let myself dream about the future. One evening, as I was leaving the office, the CEO stopped me in the hallway. "You changed everything, Jasmine. You made this a place where people want to stay. Thank you." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. I said, "I didn't do it alone, but I'm glad I didn't give up." That night, I stood at my window, watching the rain wash the streets clean. It felt like the storm I'd carried for months had finally passed. I thought about the fear, the anger, and the moments when I almost walked away. I thought about the people who helped me, the colleagues who had stood by me, and the new friends I'd made along the way. I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't just seeing Mr. Harlan fired or even getting my reputation back. It was building something better in the aftermath. It was knowing that I'd helped create a place where truth mattered, where people could thrive, and where no one had to fight alone.
The months that followed were some of the most meaningful of my life. I poured my energy into the new culture committee, working with HR, the board, and employees from every department. We launched a mentorship program, created anonymous feedback channels, and made sure every new hire understood that respect and safety weren't just policies, they were promises. I saw people who had once been silent start to speak up, not just about harassment, but about ideas, frustrations, and dreams for the company's future. I was promoted again, this time to Director of People and Culture. It was a role I never would have imagined for myself before all this began, but it felt right. I was able to shape policies, lead workshops, and be a resource for anyone who needed support. I made it my mission to keep the door open for every voice, especially those who felt overlooked or afraid. One day, I received a letter from a woman at another company. She'd heard about our transformation and wanted advice on how to stand up to her own toxic boss. She wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to start documenting everything. I'm not giving up." I replied with encouragement, resources, and a reminder that she wasn't alone. That letter reminded me that the impact of my fight went far beyond my own office walls. The company's reputation continued to grow. We were featured in industry publications for our commitment to integrity and employee well-being. Clients and partners reached out, wanting to learn from our journey. I was invited to speak at conferences, sharing not just my story, but also the lessons we learned as a team.
Each time I ended with the same message. Change is possible, but it takes courage, persistence, and a willingness to stand together. But the most rewarding moments were still the quiet ones. The analyst who stopped by my office to say thank you. The team lead who confided that she'd finally stood up to a toxic client. The new hire who said she chose our company because she'd heard it was a place where people looked out for each other. I never forgot the lessons I had learned. I kept my door open, made time for one-on-one conversations, and always encouraged people to speak up, even if it was uncomfortable. I knew that the only way to keep a healthy culture was to keep listening, keep learning, and keep holding each other accountable. Outside of work, I found a new sense of peace. I spent more time with family, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, and even started painting again. The nightmares and anxiety that had once haunted me were replaced by a quiet confidence. I knew who I was, what I stood for, and what I was capable of. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Mia. She hugged me tight and said, "You changed everything, Jasmine. You made this a place where people want to stay." That night, I stood at my window, watching the rain wash the streets clean. It felt like the storm I had carried for months had finally passed. I thought about the fear, the anger, and the moments when I almost gave up. I thought about the people who had helped me, the colleagues who had stood by me, and the new friends I'd made along the way. The greatest revenge wasn't watching him walk out. It was knowing this place would never again be his hunting ground. The legacy I left wasn't survival. It was protection for those who came after me. It was knowing that I'd helped create a place where truth mattered, where people could thrive, and where no one had to fight alone. If you remember one thing from my journey, let it be this. No one gets to decide your value but you. When someone abuses their power or tries to silence your voice, don't shrink. Rise. Stand up, speak out, and trust that the truth will find its way. You might feel alone at first, but your courage can change everything, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after. I'm Jasmine Carter, and I learned that real strength isn't just surviving the storm, it's becoming the reason the storm finally ends. And if I can do it, so can you.